I wanted to create a video to go along with the guide I've written recently called Install OpenShift for the Easy Way. The reason this guide came about is a couple of colleagues contacted me asking what is the easiest way to install OpenShift in our home labs. So I wrote this guide that will explain how to install a 3-node OCP cluster using the bare metal assisted installer. Now each of these 3 nodes are assigned both the master and worker roles. This installation method removes the need for a local DNS server, a load balancer, and a dedicated Bootstrap node. The reason we don't need a local DNS server is because we're going to use public DNS. Now here's an example of our network layout. I use 60.1 for my router, and the DHCP range is going to be 60.100 to 250. Now we're going to need to add 2 A records, api.lab.mydc.dev and starapps.lab.mydc.dev. I picked 60.30 and 60.31 because they were out of the DHCP range and currently not in use. Now to simulate bare metal, I'm going to use an ESXi host and 3 virtual machines, nodes 1, 2, and 3. Each of these nodes have 8 CPUs, 16 gigs of RAM, and 120 gig hard drive. The IP addresses are going to be assigned by DHCP. I don't have static reservations set, but you can definitely do that in your environment. So let's go ahead and create some A records. We're going to set up DNS by using Namecheap and create 2 A records. So the first one is starapps.lab.com, and that's going to go to 60.31. And then our second A record is going to be api.lab, and that's going to go to 60.30. And we'll hit the check. Now this will take a little while to propagate, but it'll be ready by the time we do the install. Now I picked lab for my cluster name, and of course my domain name is what I purchased. So your environment will be different. You don't have to use lab, you can call it whatever you like. Let's go ahead and go to the next section. So next we need to log into cloud.redhat.com. So before we do that, I want to tell you, if you don't have a free developer account, you can get one from developers.redhat.com. This will allow you to provision an OCP cluster for a 60-day trial period. So in this window, I've already logged into OpenShift Cluster Manager at cloud.redhat.com, and we're going to create a cluster. And then we're going to click on Data Center, and then under the assisted installer, which is currently Technology Preview, we're going to click Create Cluster. Now the cluster name is going to be lab, and the base domain is going to be mydc.dev. And we'll use the OpenShift version 4.7. And then we'll click Next. At this point, we're going to create a discovery ISO, and we're going to use an SSH key. So if you don't already have an SSH key, you're going to do SSH keygen. And you can just safely hit enter through these, and that'll generate you an SSH key. And we're going to want to copy this ID underscore rsa.pub to our clipboard. So you can cat ssh.pub. Go ahead and copy that. And we will just paste it here and generate the discovery ISO. And we'll click download discovery ISO. Now that the ISO has completed downloading, go ahead and go to our ESXi host and our data store and upload the discovery ISO. Now that that's completed downloading, we'll go ahead and create our virtual machines. The first one we're going to create is node 1. And you need to change the compatibility to 6.5 for now, Linux and CoreOS. And we'll select this data store, and we'll go with 8 CPUs, 16 gigs of RAM, 120 gig drive. I like mine thin provisioned. We'll change the network to VMware network, and the data store ISO will select the discovery ISO. And then we'll hit next and finish. Now we'll do node 2 exactly the same way. Linux, CoreOS. Do 8 CPUs, 16 gigs of RAM, 120 gig drive, in provision, network, ISO, and we'll select the discovery ISO. Now, if you're using vSphere, you can definitely clone these instead of just creating them manually. Do node 3 last. 6.5 compatibility, Linux, CoreOS, and we will change the CPUs to 8, 16 gigs of RAM, 120 gig, then provision drive, network, and we'll select the ISO. Next, and then finish. All right, let's go ahead and power up node 1. We'll go ahead and power up node 2. And we'll power up node 3. Just click on node 1. You can see it's booting. Same with 2. And the same with 3. Now we just go back to our cloud.redhat.com, and our host will pop up here shortly. After a few minutes, the nodes will pop up. Let's click on the first one. This is localhost, and the IP address is 225. So if we look at node 1, the IP address is 224. So let's go back and change or find 224, and we'll rename the node to match. There's 244. There's 224. So let's go ahead and name it node 1. .lab.mydc.dev. Then 225. Let's take a look at node 2. Node 2 is 244. So there's 244. Make that node 2. Click save. And then that leaves this is node 3. And we'll click save. All right. So now these say ready. It takes a little bit. But let's click next. And available subnets. Let's go ahead and uncheck virtual IPs to allocate those virtually, because we are going to specify those. So the API virtual IP is going to be 30, and the ingress is 31. That's the star apps, and then the API.lab.mydc.dev that we created earlier. And we'll use the same SSH key, and the subnet came up automatically as 60.0. And we'll just wait a minute while this says pending input. Now that the information is populated in the bottom, we can go ahead and click next. And we'll do install cluster. And this will take quite a while. It's been about 5 minutes since I started, but I wanted to show you that node 3, the role is set to master, but it says bootstrap in parentheses. So the installation status for node 1 is 5 out of 7, and node 3 has 8 tasks instead of 7. What's going to happen is the installer will reprovision node 3 from the bootstrap to a master node. Also, you can click on view cluster events, and it'll show you at what stage each of these hosts is at. So 1 and 2 reached rebooting. After they rebooted, they're at the configuration stage. So in my test, this installation has taken an hour or more, several different times. So I'll just pause at this point. All right, all the nodes status say installed. Up here, the installation progress is set as installing. This will still take a while. It'll say finalizing, and eventually you'll have a console button here that'll say click here to log into the console. So we'll continue to wait. All right, it looks like our install is finished. I wanted to mention to make sure that you keep this Cube admin username and password handy. Also download the Cube config if you haven't already. The installation from the point we hit click install cluster, it took about 45 minutes. Your environment may be different. So let's go ahead and click on this web console URL, and you're going to get a certificate error. So let's click on not secure, and we're going to export that certificate and add it to our managed certificates. And this is for Chrome. So you click on details, ingress operator, export, and we'll just save it to downloads. Then we're going to go into Chrome settings, privacy and security, and then down to manage certificates. Then we'll click on authorities, and we will import the certificate. You need to change this to any files or all files, and click on this ingress operator. And we're going to trust this certificate for identifying websites. Now at this point, you can go back to the console page and hit reload. And there goes your OpenShift dashboard. At this point, you've got a 3-node OpenShift cluster up and running successfully. Look forward to part 2, where we're going to install the simple authentication provider. We're going to configure persistent storage. We'll configure the registry to use the persistent storage, and we'll create a WordPress project and container. I hope you found this video useful and the guide as well. I wish you luck with your OpenShift cluster in the future. Bye for now.